Hello and welcome back to Railroad Quarterly, a quarterly recap of all major news in the North American rail industry. Today we'll be looking at September 2025 through November 2025. Let's jump right in. Before we begin with this quarterly though, let's take a quick trip back to August when Canada's VIA Rail took delivery of the 32nd and final train set built by Siemens Mobility. Over the last 4 years, VIA has been replacing its corridor trains, many of which are more than 45 years old, and with the last new train now on property, VIA's busiest route will be entirely made up of modern equipment. Next, in September, the MBTA released its second ever heritage unit and recently rebuilt F40PH-3C number 1030. 1030 is the first of 4 specially painted F40s coming to the T, and this one wears the Boston and Maine Minuteman livery. The next day, New Jersey Transit placed an order for an additional 200 multi-level 3 electric multiple units and additionally 12 ALP45A dual-mode locomotives, both built by Alstom. If I had to guess, this order will lead to the retirement of many GP40s on NJT's fleet, the oldest of which were built in 1965, as well as the Airo 3 EMUs. On September 13th, the Airo commuter rail, which if you don't know, operates between San Bernardino and Redlands, California, debuted its Stadler-Flirt hydrogen fuel cell trains, making for the first hydrogen-powered passenger trains in North America. 6 days later, on the 19th, the LA Metro A line was extended to Pomona North, making it the longest light rail line in the world at a whopping 57.6 miles. To ride from end to end, it takes 2 hours and 15 minutes. I know some regional rail lines that aren't that long. Speaking of regional/commuter rail, on the 22nd, Metro North's first new SC42DM Charger dual-mode locomotive entered service. These new engines, built by Siemens, are faster, more efficient, and more reliable. More importantly, they now operate on electric power wherever there's a third rail, as opposed to the outgoing P32s, which only run in electric mode in Grand Central Terminal. Unfortunately, since September, the Chargers have been temporarily removed from service after it was found that their regenerative brakes weren't turning off when stopped, creating a fire hazard. Luckily, they didn't find out about this issue the hard way. On the 26th, CSX reopened the Howard Street Tunnel in Baltimore, wrapping up a nearly year-long period of shutdowns in the area. In addition to reconditioning the 135-year-old tunnel, the rail bed was lowered by 3 feet, allowing for double-stacked intermodal trains. 3 days later, interestingly right after the Howard Street Tunnel was opened, CEO Jim Henrichs was dismissed from CSX, likely because he didn't pursue merging with Union Pacific. CSX's board of investors includes Ancora Holdings Group, which attempted to take over Norfolk Southern to increase short-term profits a few years ago, and is currently trying to do the same with CSX. Henrichs was known to run the railroad in a much more traditional manner, which obviously goes against Ancora's prioritization of short-term profits, so now Steve Angel, the former chairman of the chemical company Lind, is in charge. On the same day, the Age of Steam Roundhouse announced that it had acquired Chesapeake and Ohio 2662 number 1308, making for the museum's 25th locomotive. The next day, the MBTA's third heritage unit, and the second of this episode, was spotted, that being GP40MC-3 number 1130. 1130 wears the single stripe paint scheme, with the safety yellow variation on the nose. Dubbed the Easter egg by the T, 1130 made its debut on an autumn tourist special train before being sent to the shop for repairs, where it's been ever since. On October 1st, after a string of fire incidents, the National Transportation Safety Board recommended that Philadelphia's SEPTA sideline all Silverliner IV electric multiple units until the root cause of fires could be found. Despite this strong recommendation from the NTSB, SEPTA refused to pull this 200-plus car fleet from service, and since has been mandated by the Federal Railroad Administration to inspect all cars. Inspections were ongoing throughout the corridor and have caused periodic service outages, which come in addition to recent funding-related cutbacks. The next day, the final DC Metro 2000 series car was removed for scrapping, making way for the 8000 series cars entering service in 2028. On the 3rd, New Jersey Transit introduced the latest addition to its heritage fleet in GP40PH-2B number 4202. This unit commemorates the Pennsylvania Reading Seashore lines, which at one time controlled what is now the Atlantic City line. As always, NJ Transit has done a great job. 6 days later, on the 9th, it was announced that the Washington, D.C. streetcar will be shut down in March 2026 due to funding not being renewed. Service will continue, albeit with trolleybuses instead of trains, in March 2026. On the 13th, the Lake State Railway introduced SD70M number 1776, the first of many locomotives in this video, painted to commemorate 250 years of America, which I recently found out is called the Semi-Quincentennial. On the same day, the state of California signed into law Senate Bill 30, which prohibits the second-hand sale of retired diesel rail equipment by state agencies unless the locomotives are compliant with EPA Tier 2 diesel emission standards or better. This comes as a result of Caltrain recently selling off its retired F40PH locomotives to Peru for use on the Lima commuter rail. I get where they're coming from, that it's not great to keep polluting locomotives on the rails, but even the worst diesel locomotive is far better for the environment than the equivalent number of cars for the passengers that it can carry. One would hope that the people creating these laws know that, but apparently they don't. On the 16th, Donald Trump announced that the $16 billion in funding for the Hudson River Tunnel project is, quote, terminated, which at face value sounds scary, but this funding still has not formally been cancelled, so I guess we'll see. On the same day, the Honolulu Skyline Metro opened its second section, connecting the existing line to the airport and nearly reaching downtown Honolulu. Segment 3, which will bring service to the downtown area, will open in 2031. On the 20th, Metro North announced a new service from Grand Central Terminal in Manhattan to Albany, New York. Beginning in the spring of 2026, this Metro North service will supplement Amtrak Empire service round trips, some of which have been cut back due to East River Tunnel repairs. One Metro North round trip will run per day, serving AM and PM rush hour passengers in the morning and evening. Additionally, Amtrak will restore 2 of the 3 missing Empire service round trips. The next day, after a few months of testing at MXV Rail in Pueblo, Colorado, the first Amtrak Airo intercity train set departed for the Northeast, where it would begin testing on Amtrak. This first train is one of 8 for the Cascades route in the Pacific Northwest, although since most of Amtrak's facilities are on the East Coast, the accepting and testing of all trains in this order will take place in the Philadelphia area. 2 of the 8 Cascades Airo train sets come with their own all-new ALC-42E Charger locomotives, although 6 will come with just coaches, as they'll use one of the slightly older SC-44 Chargers already being used. Naturally, one of those has also ended up in Philadelphia to test its compatibility with the train set. 2 days later, Union Pacific announced that it wants to run their 4014 Big Boy locomotive from coast to coast this summer for the semi-quincentennial. Though the exact route of this excursion is still in planning, highlights include being in Washington, D.C. for the 4th of July, and going west via the iconic Horseshoe Curve in Altoona, Pennsylvania. The next day, the Kansas City Streetcar opened its extension to the University of Missouri at Kansas City, more than doubling the length of the line. Another extension to the riverfront is currently underway and should open in 2026. Just a day later, Dallas Area Rapid Transit opened its brand new Silver Line, connecting the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport to its northern suburbs, terminating in Plano. Services ran with brand new Stadler Flirt train sets and runs every 15 minutes at peak times, every 20 minutes midday, and every 30 minutes at night, 7 days a week. On the 27th, the MTA announced that Metro North service to Penn Station, also known as the Penn Station Access Project, will be delayed 3 years, with service now beginning in 2030. MTA claims that this is due to Amtrak, the owner of the track that Metro North will be using, not meeting its obligations on the project. On the same day, the Genesee and Wyoming introduced their semi-quincentennial, told you we'll be using that word a lot, locomotive livery on the Connecticut Southern and Kyle railroads. After a mixed reaction, G&W took a month to make some revisions and introduced a much less ugly version of this livery, which was seen on the Buffalo and Pittsburgh. Finally, on the 27th, 4 Chicago Metra F40 locomotives were spotted heading west on a BNSF intermodal train to Colorado. It is expected that these locomotives were purchased by MXV Rail and will be used in various types of testing, from more basic pulling cars on grades to potentially even crash testing. The next day, the Long Island Railroad released an RFEI, in other words, asked the industry if any car builders had interest in rebuilding its MP15 AC work engines with a new Cummins QST30 Tier 4 compliant engine. I suppose we'll see what'll happen, but in the next few years we could be seeing the MP15s getting a new lease on life. On the same day, the New Jersey Transit River Line released a wrapped train for the semi-quincentennial. Finally, to end off October, the MTA announced the purchase of 378 R268 cars built by Kawasaki to replace the R68 and R68A cars on the New York subway. The first cars are expected to enter service in 2028. On the 3rd of November, Amtrak California's San Joaquins route was officially renamed to the Gold Runner. This comes as the state of California prepares for a future operating the route without Amtrak. The San Joaquins name, which despite just being the name of the valley which it operates in, is copyrighted by Amtrak, and thus Gold Runner is the new one. For now, Amtrak will continue to operate this Oakland to Sacramento and Bakersfield corridor, but in the future it could be taken over by the state. On the same day, the first Siemens Charger locomotive entered service on Montreal's Exo commuter rail, alongside new bi-level coaches built by CRRC. These new engines, classified as EC42, will replace aging F59PH engines on Exo, and as of when this video is being made, 6 of 10 have been delivered. On the 5th, Norfolk Southern introduced a new special livery on SD70 ACEs 1230 and 1231. These two are the founding members of the Landmark series, which celebrate many of the most important cities served by Norfolk Southern. 1230, the Birmingham, and 1231, the Atlanta, made their debut on the office car train later that week, and NS announced that more of these engines are on their way and will operate in both revenue freight service as well as on special trains like this one. The same day, Amtrak broke ground on its new facilities in Washington, D.C.'s Ivy City Yard, as well as Boston's Southampton Street Yard. These new upgrades to train service and inspection facilities are in order to support the incoming Airo trains, which will enter service in the Northeast sometime around 2028. On the 7th, CIT Rail's remaining AC44 Bluebird leaser locomotives met their end, at least here in North America, being spotted on a ship bound for Nigeria. The next day, another American locomotive was shipped out of the country, with coaster F59 PHI number 3002 being spotted with SLPX reporting marks on a BNSF train. SLPX, or San Luis Potosi Shops, signals that 3002 is bound for Mexico, where it'll be rebuilt and used on one of the many new passenger services in the country. As for the other F59 PHI, it's unknown what will happen to it. On the 10th, Metro North released P32 ACDM number 216 in a red, white, and blue livery for Veterans Day. At the same time, the Reading and Northern finished painting SD40-2 number 1776, the first of two semi-quincentennial locomotives coming to the railroad. Stay tuned for a similar livery on a GP38-2 in the coming months. On the 12th, just after announcing the purchase of additional multi-level EMUs and new ALP45 locomotives, New Jersey Transit announced plans to overhaul its entire fleet of existing multi-level rail cars with refreshed interiors and, most importantly for commuters, no more foggy windows. On the 14th, to few people's surprise, Union Pacific shareholders approved the acquisition of Norfolk Southern Railway. Now it's up to the Surface Transportation Board, which will decide whether the merger will hurt competition. Obviously it will, but so did CPKC, so we'll see what happens. On the same day, Philadelphia's SEPTA completed its FRA-mandated Silveliner IV inspections, and now all cars are back in service, hopefully fire-free for the foreseeable future. It does bring up a good question though. Shouldn't SEPTA be looking into replacing these 50-plus-year-old cars? On the 16th, SD70 ACE-Tier 4s were spotted in a Lake State Railway livery, making them the first regional or short-line railroad to receive these massive road diesels. The Tier 4 Aces unfortunately weren't as well received by Class 1 railroads as the original models were, but hopefully they'll fare much better in the hands of the Lake State Railway. On the 17th, Montreal's REM opened its second section, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. Stay tuned for more route expansion in 2026 though. On the 18th of November, Amtrak announced that it set an all-time high record of 34.5 million riders in 2025, which breaks the previous all-time record held by 2024. This is likely as a result of increased service on the Northeast Regional route, new Acela trains, and the new Mardi Gras service in the Gulf Coast. If that's not a sign that the American public wants more passenger trains, I don't know what is. Finally, on the 26th, the Surface Transportation Board approved Fortress Investment Group's purchase of the Wheeling and Lake Erie Railroad, the largest regional freight railroad in the United States. Fortress Investment Group also owns Brightline, so perhaps they're trying to bolster the more reliable profits of a freight railroad to support the construction of their Brightline West project. Anyways, that's the fourth quarter of 2025, and with 2026 rapidly approaching, stay tuned for This Year on the Railroad, a recap of 2025 at the end of the month. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon in another video.